I think we have sufficient quorum in the house, and we'll start the session. My name is Mukund Kumar Sinha. I'm Senior Transport Specialist in the Asian Development Bank. And I'll request the panelists and the chairman to please come on the dais. So, the chairman, Mr. Hideaki Iwasaki, who is Director General in the ADB. We are so honored to have you, sir, as the chair. Yeah. Mr. Baldev Purushart, it's again our honor to have the Joint Secretary of DEA, who has been the Center for PPP policies and implementation in the country. May I call upon Ms. Namita Mehrotra, Director Finance and CRTC. Ms. Neha Pandit, Senior VP Tata Realty. Ms. Sumika Nakane, Senior Investment Specialist from the Asian Development Bank. Mr. Ajit Sharma, Director Finance, Delhi Metro Rail Corporation. So Mr. Partha Sarthi Reddy from NITI, he is on the way. He would join us anytime. And we have been given a target that we have to finish by 4 because the Chief Minister would be arriving after that. So without wasting any time, I would just introduce the session. The session is on PPP, a paradigm shift from financing to partnership. If you see, there has been an increased emphasis on the creation of infrastructure through public-private partnership, and these could be in any sectors. So today in this session, we are going to deliberate on what is the essence of public-private partnership, what are the larger benefits of PPP in delivery of the public goods, and also how we can get the best out of PPP projects, specifically in the transport sector. If you see the budget speech of 2025-26, the Union Government of India's budget speech, it said that each infrastructure-related ministry will come up with a 3-year pipeline of projects that can be implemented in PPP mode. And that basically shows the emphasis of the government itself on bringing in the private sector for delivery of public goods. But before I call upon the chair, maybe if I can just throw a question to the audience, what do we understand by public-private partnership? Can I have a raise of hands? Anyone? Just what is the impression? Maybe we can start with Mr. Shivmathan. You can shout it out from there, no problem. Bringing the private player. Okay. Anyone else? Yes, sir. Bring the private sector for efficient functioning.
Public coordination is for the policy and government support.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir. To add more value to mobility. Okay. Thank you very much. It's my honor to call upon our chairperson to give the opening remarks. Mr. Iwasaki has had a very illustrious career in the Asian Development Bank. He has worked as country director in Vietnam, in other countries, and also right from 2002 onwards, he has handled a lot of projects. So over to you, sir, for your opening remarks, please.
Okay, thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased and honored to be part of this session, along with these esteemed panelists. We're gathering here at a time when our cities face mobility challenges, rapid urbanization, climate imperatives, and funding gaps for infrastructure. We talked a lot about the need for more infrastructure and in a more sustainable way and more accessible, and also environmentally, and also probably from climate change point of view, less impactful. The funding requirement for the urban transport infrastructure is expected to continue to grow. Historically, urban transportation had been developed, financed, and also delivered for the most part by the public sector in India. This is not only in India, in many other parts of the world. It was in the domain of public sector. But however, we again, discussed on this topic many rounds in this forum. It is now abundantly clear that public sector alone cannot finance or deliver urban transportation projects. PPP has become a cornerstone in delivering urban transportation projects. The moderator asked that question of what's PPP, so probably that is also one of the things we would need to clarify or demystify through this discussion. But I feel that this paradigm shift is irreversible. And when we talk about private sector earlier, we saw them as a source of financing. They participate to provide or mobilize financing. But as some of the participants mentioned, we need to see them as a source of innovation, efficiency, and quality, which would benefit ultimately our citizens. And all of this should be structured around the concept of urban mobility as public goods, which would mean that public sector will still have to play a major role in this. I would just like to talk about what ADB has been doing. ADB has a private sector operations department, and it has supported urban mobility projects developed on PPP basis in India and outside. One example I would like to touch upon is electric bus deployment in Haryana, Maharashtra, and Assam, Odisha. This is based on PPP model in partnership with one private sector group. And this adopted the gross cost contract concession structure, which means that public sector still, shoulder the large share of the risks. And private sector will be paid for their performance. It's on per kilometer or per bus service basis. So this is one form of public sector shouldering larger responsibility. Another example, it's a rail-based system, not in this region, but in Thailand, where I was based. There are two urban rail lines, pink and yellow lines in Bangkok, which was developed on PPP basis. ADB provided about $300 million of financing. This, again, for a rail-based system to happen, public sector has to commit a large amount of subsidies. It was over the first 10 years, I think the government is committed to provide subsidies. It's a fairly large amount. Sorry, I don't have the immediate numbers, but compared to the initial capital investment, it's a fairly large amount, I would say. And coming back to India, earlier we announced that we would commit to mobilizing $10 billion of financing This would include third-party capital, so it's not only from ADB, over the next 5 years in India. This is for urban infrastructure, including transport infrastructure. And this will, of course, involve private sector PPP basis or otherwise. And in this, I would like to probably highlight the important distinction between funding gap and financing. Quite often we use funding and financing interchangeably, but fundamentally, funding for public infrastructure or urban transport infrastructure can be shouldered either by the general public or by the direct beneficiaries. There are no other sources. Private sector can come in to mobilize financing to bridge the gap, but they can do so only when they can be rewarded for mobilizing such financing for their services. And of course, the financing should be paid back, whereas the funding, would be basically for the project, and this is for the benefit accrued to the beneficiaries, either the general public or the direct beneficiaries. And direct beneficiaries would probably be the users directly using the services, but also there can be beneficiaries who are benefiting from the increase in their property value. And I think TOD has been discussed, and also this session may be discussing TOD, but TOD is basically to expand the base of funders to a project. So I'd just like to highlight this distinction before we go into the discussion. And in any case, unlocking PPP, for private sector to come in, there must be enabling environment mechanisms and proper risk sharing. I'm sure many of the panelists would be touch upon this. And in the end, there must be close collaboration and coordination among all the involved parties on the public sector as well as private sector. And first and foremost, there must be a trust among the parties. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to build infrastructure and also provide services for public goods. And in all of this, I'd like to go back to the key considerations we should have in providing urban public transport services, infrastructure and services, which is affordability. They should be affordable, and they should be physically accessible, and they should be sustainable, financially, of course, but also socially and environmentally. In all these respects, it should be sustainable. Let me conclude my opening remarks with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you very much. I think that was a very wonderful start, and in terms of bringing out the differences between funding and financing, and who actually funds and how the private sector can finance. I think that lays down a very good introduction to the topic. And now I would like to invite Mr. Baldev Purushart, who is the Joint Secretary in the Department of Economic Affairs, and he has been heading the office responsible for PPP policies, for PPP strategies, for project appraisal of PPP projects through the PPP AC committee, and also for development of schemes, and also for bringing in frameworks and guidelines for the PPP. He has been involved in that for the last 6 years, and it's we are so happy to have him because we can't have anyone better than him in the country to explain what is going on in PPP in the country. So, sir, I would call on you to just give us a starting brief on the PPP in India and what are the policies and what are the frameworks. Please, thank you.
Thank you very much, dignitaries on the dais, esteemed participants. I'm very thankful to Mahua in general and my esteemed friend Mukund Sinhaji in personal to invite me to participate in this session. I think as told, infrastructure development and PPP was my daily bread and butter for last 6 years. So I can't say that I'm master of the subject, but yes, I do understand little bit. So PPP technically can be little, I will discuss little theoretical and something what we are doing as Government of India in this field. So we understand that PPP technically can be done in any sector, any field. But when it is done in infrastructure, it is coming more natural to infrastructure development. I don't know many of you whether you understand it or not, but infrastructure has certain characteristics and PPP fits in those characteristics very well. There are certain characteristic features of infrastructure like large scale investment, natural monopoly, sunk cost, huge externalities, asymmetry of information sometimes. And that's why infrastructure development requires a particular path. I don't know how many of you have been student of economics? Anyone? Right, so one hand. So if you read economics, it says that there are certain, in a perfect market system, there are certain conditions where market fails to deliver. If those conditions emerge and you leave things to the market, it will not give you the optimal results. And there are 3 such conditions. One is natural monopoly, other is huge externalities, and third is asymmetry of information. And technically, infrastructure suffers from all these 3. So if you leave infrastructure development only to the market, you will not get it in the optimal manner. And therefore, government has to chip in. And infrastructure has to be developed either by the government or by private sector in a regulated manner. And when private sector is brought to develop infrastructure in a regulated manner, that is generally broadly what we call PPP, where both come for a partnership. Now, given the chance, I would like to change the name of the topic, which says that paradigm shift from financing to partnership. That is not the paradigm shift PPP is bringing. This is very obvious. PPP is after all what? It's a partnership. The third P is partnership. So partnership is not the paradigm shift. Paradigm shift is something else. And it brings 2 paradigm shifts in infrastructure development. One, that if you develop infrastructure in a non-PPP manner, it is generally developing of the asset only. So in government projects scheme, we generally go for asset development, we calculate its cost, we find out the way to develop it, and the rest use of the asset for whatever asset life is, 30 year, 20 year, 40 year, that is a subsequent action. So the project cost in its totality, in its life cycle, has never been assessed, never been financed, never been thought of. So the first change PPP is bringing to infrastructure development is the paradigm shift of bringing life cycle approach to it, where we are not only concerned with the development of asset, we are much more concerned about the kind of services we are going from it. And therefore, the cost of the asset is not the hardcore asset only, but also the O&M cost, another kind of cost. So it's a life cycle assessment of cost. And that is a mistake sometimes we make when we try to compare the asset creation cost of a non-PPP along with the PPP cost, and we say, look, PPP is costly. It is costly because we are comparing apples with oranges. These are life cycle cost, this is only asset creation cost. So that's one paradigm shift it is bringing. The other paradigm shift PPP is bringing is sharing of risks. And in a non-PPP system, who shares all the risk? It's the government. They share the design construction risk, they share the ownership risk, the financing risk, the O&M risk. Every risk is shared by the government alone. Whereas in PPP, we try to allocate different risks to private and public partners depending on who can take care of that risk in a better manner or in most optimal manner. And these are two big points which is coming through PPP. There are some other benefits also. Now the question comes in that why should we do PPP? Of course, there are many benefits. And the two benefits which I are thinking of, that is one, we want to bring in private investment, and second, we want to bring in private efficiencies. Investment, because as Iwasaki-san has said, that there is a gap between the infrastructure investment we are doing today and the infrastructure we want, for which what amount is supposed to be invested. So if we take infrastructure requirement of 2030, we take infrastructure requirement of 2047, this is a huge ask. If we want to bring world-class infrastructure to public at large, and that is the aspiration and ambition of the government, that requires substantially higher investment than what we are doing today. So there are only two ways. One, of course, government bring the entire investment. Technically, maybe yes, and that is also coupled with the fact that government can always raise cheaper money. So government range of money is what? The GSEC rate. Whereas private sector is always going to raise money at a higher rate. So government can provide money at a far cheaper rate. But even then, there are certain other limitations on the government, because you cannot raise unlimited, borrowing from the market. There are FRBM considerations and other considerations which put certain kind of limitations on the government budgetary maneuver. And therefore, it becomes mandatory for the government to think of other ways of bringing in money, private money. But the second point, that when the private sector is bringing money, albeit little costly, they also brings the efficiencies. And when you do the proper structuring of the project and you do the value for money analysis, etc., there is where you need to, as government person, authority, you need to see whether ultimately the government or the public sector is gaining or not. Maybe little costly money, but more efficiencies. In a life cycle approach, if you combine everything and then you see where you are gaining or you are losing. And PPP is worth doing when it brings more value for money for the public at large, or for the government, or for the public authority. So that's the general understanding how PPP should be done. Second, of course, I fully agree what has been said by Iwasaki-san, that ultimately who pays for the infrastructure. There are only three sources. He said government or the user. I generally put it in a manner, there are only three sources. One, it is paid by the taxpayer. So you develop an infrastructure project today through government budgetary support. Who is paying for it? Taxpayers, because that money comes from taxpayers. The second source of payment comes from the future generation. That happens when government take loan. Government is taking loan from ADB, taking loan from World Bank, taking loan from many other sources. They borrow, and that is paid in a substantial longer time, 20, 30, 40 years. I am not paying for that. Who is paying? The next generation who is coming. So the second set of people are the next generation who are going to pay for the infrastructure. And third is, of course, the users. Could be the direct users of that infrastructure, could be the indirect users who are getting other benefits. So when you structure a project, especially the PPP project, you have to be very careful about from where the money is going to come. And of course, financing, project finance is responsibility of the private sector in a PPP. So having said that, now let me say that in last 10, 11 years, Government of India has done tremendously well in pushing PPP forward. It's a government policy. And budget after budget, government has announced this policy in one way or other. If you read budgets of last 6, 7, 8 years, you will find out that in every budget, two aspects are there. One is push towards infrastructure development, second is push towards PPP into infrastructure development. And even in the last budget itself, you will find that there is a talk of, infrastructure project pipeline development. But I can, give you 3, 4 major areas. If you see the budget from 2020 till today, every budget there has been substantial increase on capex funding, capital expenditure, roughly 30 to 33% year on year. Average 30% plus year on year in last 6, 7 years. What we were spending in entire 1 year in 2019, that we spent in 1 quarter in 24-25. So there is a tremendous, resources investment in infrastructure. That is one part, budgetary support. Second is, approach of project pipelines. So you all might be aware that there was a NIP, National Infrastructure Pipeline, which was pipeline of greenfield project worth $1.5 trillion. And then there was a National Asset Monetization Pipeline, which was a pipeline of worth $80 billion. And on the success of these pipelines, government has this budget again announced that they will go for Asset Monetization Pipeline 2, which would be roughly a pipeline of $100 billion projects, and PPP pipeline, which we have made a pipeline. Probably in next coming of days it will be put on a website. Roughly right now we have assessed around 170 billion projects, but it will be further, much more project will be added to it. It will become a larger thing. So there is a push towards large scale infrastructure development. And to do that, PPP has been found a very viable way. Although ministry wise there are different takes. Some ministry have been much more successful in doing PPP, some have not been so much successful. So in transport ministry, if I take 4 sectors, for example, railways, primarily railway infrastructure development has been done through government budgetary funding. They have not been very successful in PPP. But if you take road, more than 50% of the road, national highways are developed through PPP mode. Almost entire port infrastructure, the business infrastructure, is developed through PPP mode. Generally, port has taken a decision, they will go for landlord model, where the common infrastructure will be developed by authority, but the business terminals and other business infrastructure, they will be developed by private partners in a PPP mode. Almost entire, in last 6, 7, 8 years, entire infrastructure development in port sector has been done through that. In the airport, some of the airports are being developed in PPP, some in non-PPP, but in brownfield airport development, PPP has again been very successful. So recently, a couple of years back, we have successfully bid out 6 airports in OMDA model of PPP. Before that, you might be aware that Delhi and some other airports, Bombay and other airports were bidded out. Now we are again in the process of bidding out many more airports in PPP mode. So there are different ways if you move towards transport sector to other sectors. So for example, entire renewable development is primarily through PPP. 95% of the solar projects, wind projects, etc. are being developed in PPP mode. But in hydro, almost 90% is developed through government way of project development. So different sectors have different take of PPP depending on the nuances of that sector, depending on the structuring, project structuring. Metro has been one area where there is tremendous possibility for developing projects in PPP mode. We have seen some successful deliveries. And in coming years, I am hopeful that many more metro projects will come up in PPP mode. And to support that, government has worked on both sides, demand interventions and supply interventions. So on demand intervention, there is a push for encouraging government departments, whether in central ministry or states, to come up with many more PPP projects, whether it is through PPP project pipeline or asset monetization pipeline or NIP or whatever. So that is one part. Second, we are also encouraging them for capacity building exercises, hand-holding, knowledge projects. Under Infrastructure Finance Secretariat, if you go to our website, you will find that we have developed very quality knowledge projects which helps authorities to understand what is PPP and how they can do PPP, how they can structure a project and take up a project. So these are all, demand side interventions. Second, to supply side intervention, we are working on channelizing cheap and patient capital towards infrastructure development, because infrastructure is a long-term project. It requires capital which is not suffering from asset liability mismatch. It's long-term capital coming at a little cheaper cost. So we have come up with schemes like viability gap funding, through which we make those projects viable which are inherently non-viable. Then we have allowed 100% FDI in automated route to almost all infrastructure projects so that foreign capital can come in. We have given tax exemption to sovereign wealth funding to infrastructure. If they fund infrastructure, they will be exempted from tax on dividend, interest and other things. We have also taken up many other, like we set up a new DFI, NAFED, which is only to support infrastructure funding and financing. Then there are earlier, institutions like IIFCL, REC, PFC, there are so many, NIIF, there are so many institutions, so many instruments through which we have supported bringing of cheap and patient capital to infrastructure. INVIT is one successful example where the NHI INVIT has done in a very quick time tremendous business. We started with a small 5,000 crore sales of unit. Now it is reaching up to 50,000 crore. So that is the kind of success we are providing. And whenever I go to different fora, whether it is in nation or outside the country, I always used to say that today in the world, India is providing the biggest opportunity in the field of PPP and infrastructure, and it is also providing the most varied kind of opportunities. So it's not limited to one sector. It is providing opportunity of having PPP in almost every sector. You will not find many successful examples of social sector PPP project in many other countries, especially in which the financing risk is taken by the concessionaire. You will find some examples, but there the financing risk is taken by the government or the public authority. Here in India, we have done successful projects in health, in education, in water sector, in solid waste management, where the full financing risk is taken by the private sector in DBFO team. So that's the kind of a strength on which we are working. So I'm very hopeful that in coming years, India is going to be largest. We are still the largest, PPP taker in the world. But we are going to come up with kind of success stories which will become or which will set the benchmarks for other PPP projects for everyone to look at it and may take some benefit out of it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. I think that was a very engrossing talk, and you have covered almost all aspects of PPP and where India stands. And there are some very important points which you mentioned, especially of the two aspects about asset creation, life cycle costing, and in the last item which you mentioned that the social sector, even the financing risk is being taken by the private sector, which is something must be new to many of us. So thank you very much. I think you have covered almost all the aspects on which we are planning to deliberate today. Coming to the part of the asset creation, where you mentioned that it's important to see at the life cycle costing when we look at PPPs. I would turn for a follow-up question to Ms. Namita Mehrotra, who is Director of Finance in CRTC. She also has a very illustrious career, and she has been in Niti Aayog earlier, where she framed guidelines, policies, preparation of standard model documents. In fact, the model PPP document is something which ma'am has worked on when she was in Niti, and also in structuring long-term O&M agreements. So coming to the O&M part, which is basically when we are seeing the life cycle, creation of value. I would like to ask you that your experience with RRTS, where I think there is a talk of already some part of it has been given to the private sector. How do you see that that can bring in efficiency and proprietorship of the private sector, and at the same time reduce the life cycle cost? And do you see any policy gaps there? You have any suggestions in terms of what can be done further as a way forward? So would like to hear to you.
Dignitaries on the dais and participants here today, good afternoon to you all. And thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about the O&M of RRTS. RRTS, essentially the functioning is similar to the metros, although there are distinct technical features and specifications. So if we look at the metro systems, metros have essentially, barring a few examples which were talked about, which were done under PPP, rest has been constructed through public funds, and also operated and maintained through public funds, or rather the user charges and whatever internal resources that the companies could generate. So the companies themselves took the responsibility of O&M, although there were certain examples where the private sector was brought in. For example, Chennai, for their operators, entered into long time back entered into a manpower contract for that, and other systems also for various kinds of asset maintenance, or station cleaning, etc., or various other activities, entered into contracts, long-term contracts with the private sector. However, there was no such scheme of comprehensive outsourcing or long-term contract with the private sector for comprehensive operation and maintenance. And that is why, guided by the philosophy of long-term sustainability, that is something that has been a challenge with all public transit agencies. So looking at that, not only enhancing non-fare revenues, but also looking at cost optimization. NCRTC, that is doing the first Namo Bharat from Delhi to Meerut, decided to look for a private operator so that the entire O&M activity could be passed on to the private sector. The idea was cost optimization, and as somebody said, bringing in the private sector efficiencies and innovations as well. So if we look at the operations and maintenance side, we have 3 contracts. The first that we entered was with respect to rolling stock, wherein we clubbed the 15-year maintenance along with the supply of rolling stock. So that was the first contract that we entered, and there were KPIs provided within that contract, and it was a lump sum bidding that we did, and year-wise payments in percentage terms were laid down based on the overhauls, etc., that happened with rolling stock, so that the cash flow of the contractor would be maintained. The second contract that we did was related to the comprehensive O&M. This contract document, we structured it in-house, and after extensive consultation with the probable bidders, the international operators, domestic agencies, and here also the bidding was on a lump sum basis, and year-wise payouts were laid down in terms of percentages, that what would be the case. Pre-commissioning was also paid for separately, and then 10 years of during the commission period. So This contract was for 12 plus 5 years, extendable by 5 years, and also had a sweetener in terms of refusal of first right for the, right of first refusal for the second corridor when it came in. So this was also part of the contract. The third was for the automatic fare collection, which we did on a hybrid annuity mode just for the hardware. And that was about a 10-year contract that we did. So essentially the entire O&M was covered within these 3 contracts. Now this actually, when we completed the awarding these contracts, we were totally aware of our long-term next 10 or 12 years O&M cost liability. So that was one thing that happened. And also, so we could actually think in terms of looking at how we were to manage our liabilities, because we also had a heavy loan. So we could structure our non-fare revenues where we are looking at lump sum upfront payouts coming in, so we could match that with our requirement. So that was something that we envisaged that we would be able to do. Another area where we have gone in for the private sector participation, which I just realized while Mr. Pushad was talking about solar, is that we have gone in for rooftop solar. So all our stations have solar panels on their rooftop, and many of our stations are now net zero, and we have platinum IGBC rating for those stations. So the idea is that ultimately we are also looking at 60%. So this has been done on the RESCO model. So that is what makes it interesting, that there is no capital investment from our side, and on all these on the depot and on the stations we've used the RESCO model. Now these contracts, all of them have a well-defined system of incentives as well as penalties. In the, I will mainly talk about the comprehensive O&M contract because that's the bigger one. The rolling stock one is restricted to rolling stock, so it's very specific. In this, the traffic risk is not passed on to the O&M contractor. It is essentially a payment contract, so it's a long-term contract for this. And as I said, that there's a lump sum amount that was bid for. In this, certain risks, traffic risk in the sense that there is an incentive provided that once the whole system is functional, a certain period after that, there is an incentive for increasing the ridership that has been built in. For non-fare revenues, the principle for sharing of non-fare revenues is provided because even while we were awarding this contract, we were not sure of what would be available for non-fare in the stations, what spaces would be available, etc. So we did not want that the amount that he was quoting for O&M should be cross-subsidized through non-fare revenues, because if those didn't materialize, then that would impact the quality of service. So we laid down the principles, and on a case-to-case basis or within certain defined principles, he was permitted to undertake non-fare activities. So also the COVID actually taught us this, that certain agencies had to stop operations completely. So there could be variations in terms of operations. So we took care of this risk, we worked out, and we realized that a 15% decrease or increase in the frequency of train operation did not lead to any reduction or increase in costs. But anything beyond that actually brought in risks for the operator. So plus minus 15%, the risk was on the operator, and beyond that, it was sought to be compensated through a mechanism. Some kind of termination was also provided. These contracts don't actually involve any kind of investment on the part of the O&M contractor, except for if they need to invest for some machines or equipment for maintenance purposes or some working capital requirement. But otherwise, no such funds are invested, so the termination payments also were quite simple. So now when we look at this, we realize that our O&M costs are much lower, are expected to be much lower than what was projected in the, at the time of sanction. And there are certain learnings too from, the operator. So the operators, they look, we don't see when we do it as publicly operated, we don't look at the downtime as something as losses. Whereas the operator, any downtime, they consider that as a loss for that particular cost center. So if due to traction there is a downtime, then that loss is booked to that cost center of traction, and so they are the ones responsible for that. So this is the kind of so there's a natural incentive for them to rectify the losses at the earliest, because otherwise that loss gets booked against them. So this kind of a business sense that it brings into your working, that was something that we learned. And we find that there is quick attendance to any kind of faults that may occur. I think what we've learned is that the operator is a partner to us, and we are able to, that comprehensive O&M actually enables the operator to look at all the systems holistically, and to see any interfaces that come in. He's able to manage them in a particular way. So that was about the O&M that we had. And so far as the, you said that, if there are any policy gaps and anything that we, so PPPs are enabled by the Metro Policy 2017 that we have. And it talks of the various models, and it actually encourages the metros to look at PPPs for O&M. However, although the O&M acts don't talk about the concessionaire or PPPs, but so it would be a good idea that this concept, and I think it's work in progress, that this would get incorporated in the acts as and when they are amended. But there's nothing that stops from PPPs being done in this. The DBFOT models, we heard about them. In the VGF, I mean, in various discussions that we have, and I don't know whether it is possible, but these are only ideas that come to our mind, and whether we can look at that because of metros or rail-based systems being extremely capital intensive. Can we look at a higher VGF with a major part of it being given in the O&M phase? And that whatever increase is being considered, that may be, subject to the states monetizing the externalities so that they are able to generate the revenues for meeting this, this extra O&M expenditure. So, for example, if we can insist that they should be able to do VCF, or they should have TOD policies, so if we can mandate that, and that would lead to increase in the state revenues, which can actually be channeled, and there are various mechanisms of which we have been talking, but for example, urban transport fund, etc., but they have not really materialized. So if we can have a mechanism through which this can be done, it may help out in greater private, bringing in more funds, or maybe increasing the VGF. Then on the O&M side, if we see, there are no templates or no standardized documents. So there are varieties of ways in which somebody may like the Metro Policy talks of net cost, then we've done gross cost. So there are various templates, or there may be part, for some particular asset if that is to be done. So we could look at more standardized documents. Or in this area, there is a gap we don't have. And also, land value capture also forms a major part of the metros generating non-fare. And there is extensive private sector participation. So we could also look at templates or standardized documents in that area, So through legal as well as maybe the finance ministry could also, we could have a multi-ministry committee kind of a thing. If then maybe also when the system, say the O&M contract, our O&M contract gets over in 15 years. So how do we, the handing over and taking over? We have given that contract, but we also think, in what state will those assets be handed over to me? What can be the protection that can be provided to the authority? So on this aspect also, we need some thinking, and maybe we need to evolve or discuss this matter more. So far as non-fare revenues are concerned, whether it is public or private systems, I think there is a real need to look at the approvals. We really need to look at single window clearances for that, because the agencies keep on running from pillar to post to get the approvals, and that delays the generation of non-fare revenues and impacts the viability of the system. Also, we could think of the metros as well as for the RRTS, to think in terms of devising a financing plan the way it was done for NHAI, and I think that really laid down the groundwork for how in future, so maybe for the next 10 years, in consultation with the states, if we could draw out the financing plans, wherein we could decide what is to be, which areas are to be done through public funds, where can we bring in DBFOT, or where, how the private sector can be involved. If we can do that, that would also bring predictability and long-term policy kind of a thing for the private sector to look at. And of course, if, I don't know, that's asking for the moon, but if any tax breaks for the private sector coming in, investing in the metro systems, if we can look at that, or if any low cost, we can provide some subvention, or some low cost funds can be, made available to them. So I also feel that maybe ADB could look at, how this framework could be structured, as this is the need that, so ADB could also help, or other FDBs could help out in this, in structuring these kind of documents or helping out. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, ma'am. I think a very interesting talk, and talking about the long-term O&M contracts, we have to look at the long-term, and at the same time, Joint Secretary Sir had mentioned that there is a huge appetite for the private sector, and there is a positive way forward which we are looking at. I would now turn to Mr. Ajit Sharma, Director of Finance, Delhi Metro. I personally feel that urban rail PPPs have been quite that way, quite good in the country, because we have 5 PPPs. I mean, compared to any other country, it would be much more in terms of ratio. I would like to, request you speak on what is your assessment, being the 4th largest or 3rd largest metro in the world. What is your assessment that PPPs, how have they performed, and what do you think is the way forward? And secondly, as Namita ma'am mentioned, that smaller PPPs, the unbundling approach, where you have the RESCO model for the solar or for the AFC or for O&M, where that is something which is more attractive for the public sector as well as the private sector, and also has lesser risk. So maybe a way to move forward on first on that. So we would like to hear your views on that. But before that, I have an important announcement. I just got a chit saying that the Chief Minister would be around. Honorable Chief Minister will be here at 4. So we have to end at 3:45 because there is some changes to be made in this. So I'll request you to limit your voice only to 5 minutes, not more than that.
So, good afternoon, dignitaries on the dais and the participants here. Actually, the topic of today's discussion is the public-private partnership. And as one of my previous speakers said, that the partnership is already inherent. So why we are saying that there is a paradigm shift to the partnership, or to the towards the partnership. But actually, what I want to say is that whenever we are implementing the PPP, I'm only talking from my own experience only, I cannot talk about the other sectors, I'm talking about the metros only. Are we really doing it in a partnership way? Are the public and the private sector, are they behaving in a partnership right at the inception stage, or the government is behaving in a standoffish way that once the contract is given, now it is your baby. Whatever happens to you, if there is a change in the law, if there is a change in any other situation, which cannot be, predicted or foretold. Now, what is the mechanism to handle all that? That has to be actually incorporated in all our PPP contracts, unless and until these are incorporated in one way or the other, unless and until they are delineated. The partnership will not be a real partnership. That is the first take which I want to say. Now, the second issue which I have been asked to address is that, what has been the performance of the PPP in the metro sector. In metro sector, I'm sure that most of you will be aware right now there is one PPP, that is the Pune Metro Line 3, that is being implemented by Tatas, and the other 4, the 3 are already, they have gone back to the concessionaire, and 4th is already, that is the Mumbai Metro 1, that is almost, one day or the other it will also go back to the concessionaire. So you can say that the performance of the PPP, in the metro sector has not been very encouraging for the new players to, come in and, take up the responsibility. There are huge amount of risks involved in this PPP. They are very large value projects. It is not possible that even the smaller players can take up these projects in a metro sector. So if I try to dissect, all these 4 cases, where the PPPs have not performed to the way, what they should have performed, or one of the important reason, is the risk sharing has not been proper. As I mentioned, that there is a standoffish approach as far as the government is concerned, that it is your responsibility, your baby, whether any clearances are required to be taken, land acquisition, R&R, or whether it is the environmental clearance, whether it is the tree, shifting of the trees, cutting of the trees. So all those responsibilities, they are passed on and they are not in a better position. So because of that, there are huge delays in the initial period, and because of that, the whole, their calculation, their internal calculation of the returns, they go haywire. So that probably is one of the reason which is there in virtually in all the metro projects. The other is the revenue risk. That is when the O&M actually comes into the picture, the revenue risk is a huge risk. Whatever, whether it is the government or whether it is the DPR are prepared by the private sector on their own, whether they are re-verified, but actually they are not materializing on the ground. The ridership figures are not materializing on the ground. There can be various reasons. Like one of the important reasons which I can think in a city is that a lot of people, they have to shift from A mode to B mode. Now, shifting from A mode to B mode, they constitute a major chunk of these people. Now, there are some enabling things, enabling situations have to be there, whether they actually materialize or not. Like, for example, the first mile and the last mile connectivity is not the responsibility of the PPP operator. Now, whether the first mile or the last mile connectivity, if it is not provided to the extent it should be there, that shifting will not take place. Whether the development of the city around those nodes or the stations which may have been indicated in the plan, in the city development plan, it has been indicated in the next years, 10 years we'll have a CBD here at this particular node, we'll have a residential area at this particular node. All these things, they actually affect directly or indirectly, what is the ridership which is going to come. So this is a very, very major risk which we need to, consider, and because of that, the ridership, they don't materialize, and people, they try to come out of this contract. And apart from that, there is another aspect is that we are dealing with actual human beings on day-to-day basis. Delhi Metro is carrying 70 lakh people daily. You can imagine, that every family is going to be affected even if you change the price or the fare by even 50 paisa or even a rupee. And it has a huge political implication. Now, this is, very, very peculiar to the metro system. Because of this, it is, even if all the provisions were there, that they can have, a fare committee will be there, or even, the fare structure will be there, it can be increased every year. But the reality is that it was not possible to increase the fares, on a very, very regular basis. Even a government organization like the Bangalore Metro DF is there, how difficult it is to increase the fare, how many times, you know, we have to move from one political party to the other political party, one dispensation to the other dispensation, to convince them that it is 7 years, no fares have been increased, but still doesn't come through. So what I'm only trying to say is that in our PPP, and when you are dealing with the port, when you are dealing with the road, there is a very major difference that we are dealing with the live human beings, and they are very, very cost conscious. In the case of a highway also, whenever the increase was there, at least some portion, you know, the cars and some mobiles or something, you know, it was taken off. Finally, it is passed down only to the motor vehicles, you know, which they have their own mechanism to pass it on into the system. Similarly, so what I'm only trying to say is that here it is like for example, even in the railways, the sector which is dealing with the people, there it is very difficult to increase the fare. In other cases, you know, depending upon, you know, what are the market conditions, in road, you know, if suppose the prices or the, you know, the rates are increasing, so you can also, you know, you can join the bandwagon and you can increase it. Similarly, in the port sector also. So I think this is a very important, you know, factor which we need to consider, and we have to find out a way, you know, how to do it. Like for example, there is an option which Namita just mentioned, that non-fare box revenue is a very, very critical source. So unless and until we reduce our dependence on, you know, to the user fee, there will be a problem. The non-fare box revenue, the local municipal corporations, they put one or the other restrictions. The development plans, you know, whether it is the TOD or others, you know, the metros are not able to do it, though technically it is all available to us that we can, you know, capitalize on that. So all those solutions, you know, because in metro project, a lot of externalities are there, whether I'm doing it as a government organization or whether a private sector is doing it. Unless and until those externalities, there is a proper mechanism to bring it into the system through VCF, through TOD, through non-fare box revenue, and the dependence on the fare box revenue is reduced. Till as such time there will be issues with regard to the PPP in the metro sector. I mean, that is what I feel. Of course, these points are debatable, and they can be, you know, they can be some pluses and minuses, some addition and deletion to these things, but these are, I strongly feel about these points. And even otherwise, if you look at it, when the DPR of the metro sector is prepared, the FIRR is 1%, 0.5%, 2%, 3%, EIRR is 14%, 16%. Now, even if I give a VGF for 40%, which is mandated right now, it is not possible to get a 14 to 16% for a private operator. It is just not possible. So as Namita also mentioned, that we need to even look at, you know, that whether these are, you know, sector specific. 40%, can it be extended to metro, can it be extended to RRTS, or whether there should be some other limit, we need to look at that. Then as far as the unbundling is concerned, yes, unbundling, even DMRC right now, you will be surprised, almost 30 to 40 PPP projects we are doing it. Now somebody will ask that, what are these PPP projects? All these commercial developments, all these malls which we have developed at the station, we have only provided the land. We have called the construction is done by the private operator. The construction is done by him. He runs the show and he shares the profit with us. So we are doing a lot of PPP, but of course, you know, when you talk about the main metro, of course we are not doing it. In smaller stretches, we have identified few stations also. Akshardham station in Delhi, similarly Azadpur station in Delhi. That was done, you know, combined the station as well as the commercial development was done in one go only. So that is also a small PPP. And even in the O&M, what the RRTS has done, I feel that is also, you know, some sort of a PPP only, where the private sector efficiencies, the private sector investments we are bringing into the picture. As far as the risks, some of the risks which I feel, you know, that needs to be taken care of, so that there is a quickly. Okay, I think that is. Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. And I think very important aspect which you touched on is the enabling environment for the private sector. I mean, unless until we have the enabling environment, it becomes very difficult to have a viable private sector project. And at this point of time, It's my privilege to call upon Ms. Neha Anand Pandit, who is the only speaker from the private sector, I think, in the group. And Tata Realty is doing the Pune Metro, which we talked about. So I'll request you, Ms. Neha, if you can, give your views and maybe on the softer side of it, how you look at PPP and what could be the enabling environment for that. Please.
How much time do we have?
Maybe 3-4 minutes.
Okay, great.
It's not.
Distinguished fellow panelists and my friends, a very good afternoon to all of you. And thank you very much for this opportunity. I would have not liked to do this, but I'll begin with a small complaint that, look, the concessionaire is again at the receiving end, and I have to pare down the time that I was allotted to make the speech, so I have to do it in fast-forward mode, but I'll try my best, like we always do. Well, to begin with, since my fellow panelists have touched upon all the critical topics in the PPP space with regards to the perception that it is more to bridge the funding gap than a proper partnership, I will really focus on the concessionaire side of the story. When I began my stint in PPP, this was some 15 years ago, I was very fortunate to have a diverse experience across PPP projects in the road sector, metro space, Line 1 in Mumbai, the Delhi Airport line, and then of course now Line 3 in Pune. And it was in the project finance team where again the recurring theme was financing the project. So for me also what is etched in my memory is that PPPs happen because there is a financing gap, and that gap needs to be necessarily filled in by participation from the private sector. And again, when you look at the way people behave in PPP projects, this is what happens. People always perceive the private investor coming in because there is paucity of funds, and quite often than not, once the financing part is taken care of, then this kind of contract is quickly relegated to being an EPC contractor, an EPC contract, where the relationship becomes a relationship between a contractor and a client rather than as equal partners with equal risk allocations. When I've observed in the last 15 years as to what really goes wrong along the way, there are 3 A's that come to my mind. The first part is awareness, level of awareness. To begin with, people perceive PPP projects as being projects to bridge the funding gap. So therefore, the mentality or the mindset to treat the other party as an equal is just not existent. And then the second aspect is the concessionaire, who begins to live in a state of victimhood right after the bid is won. Because then every day during interactions with the authority, one way or the other, the concessionaire is always caught between a rock and a hard wall and a hard place. And then invariably this relationship evolves into a relationship of being a victim of circumstances. I think the level of awareness is very critical, and that determines the next set of things that happen in the concession. The second part is the attitude. As a result of this level of awareness, invariably people begin to display a certain kind of attitude, wherein the authority becomes the superior party, and then the concessionaire becomes an inferior party. So this attitude is reinstated in every interaction that happens between the parties. I would have liked to give some instances or experiences in my own life, but I think we have a paucity of time, so I'll avoid that. But again, same problem with the attitude being, the consistent across levels of officials and then the concessionaire side. Before we know it, things go from bad to worse. The third part is the actions that happen because of that level of awareness. So to give you an example, in concession agreements, typically there are certain roles and responsibilities for each party. But then sometimes from the authority side, people begin to step into the roles of financial experts or technical experts when they are not adequately qualified to do that. And when they overstep that brief, naturally, of course, then there is a defensiveness that creeps in from the concessionaire side. And before you know it, there are standoffs, and sometimes there is no resolution in sight. But again, since I'm talking on behalf of the concessionaire, and the concessionaire is putting money into the project, and there are of course lenders, senior lenders involved, so the concessionaire has no choice but to make peace and move on. Because somewhere the concessionaire is worried about promoter IRRs. I remember when we bid for projects, the consistent theme is what IRR are we going to earn, post-tax, pre-tax. So the moment something goes wrong, the kind of disproportionate impact that happens on the IRR is something that we are scared of, because we are answerable to our promoters. And even when we begin with the funding of the project, for example, usually it's a double-digit figure for WACC. But then, as time goes, we suddenly realize that though we have got finance in much less than what we actually anticipated, but because of the external factors which were not attributable to us, we have ended being in a much worse place. And therefore, there has been a big significant impact, an adverse impact on the IRR that we had calculated. Now, this is only something that I'm talking about in the CAPEX phase. But move to the operations phase, and then you have a different set of problems. For example, you're not really earning the revenues that you contemplated, because several assumptions that you made that time just don't exist anymore. So how do you deal with that? And to that extent, I find that the Western countries are so much more evolved, because there, if there are things that happen which were not contemplated in the concession, there are mechanisms to compensate and give relief to the concessionaire. For example, during COVID, in many of my projects, including the cable car project that we have done in Dharamshala, we realized we did not get any help from the authority. It was considered to be a force major event, which was an act of God. But then, in the Western countries, there is a mechanism to compensate concessionaires so that they can make up for the loss of revenue or the time lost during such incidents. The third part, particularly with regards to actions, which follows because of the level of awareness, can be really the deal breaker. And a continuous set of actions from the concession authority as well as concessionaire can seriously hamper the prospects of the project. Now, coming to the resolution part, I do believe there are things that we can do better. For example, if we could have orientations wherein people who are going to be involved in a PPP project are brought in early, so that they are actually oriented in terms of what they need to do, the kind of mindset they need to have. What is it that they can do to resolve disputes early on? All these things, and then, in a way, a very consistent approach to keeping them involved and engaged is very important. Maybe a nodal authority or an agency can play this role, where both partners sit on the table as equals and things can be resolved quickly. The second part is with regards to reviews. Can a nodal agency do reviews where again the two parties sit as equals and things can be resolved amicably rather than letting them fester and then become bigger problems? The third part is training, where all people can be trained, and there should be a consistency and continuity in those trainings so that people understand the true essence of PPP projects, which is partnership, and everybody benefits out of it. I know I don't have too much time now, but I do believe and I hope that in India also we will evolve quickly in the metro sector especially, and I think in that sense the road sector has done very well. For example, their Yojana like the Vivad Se Vishwas, it's a game changer. I have myself been involved in some of those discussions, and I believe we could have some such things in the metro sector as well, which will go a long way in getting more interest from private investors into the sector.
Road sector ka nahi Vivad Se Vishwas tak. That is a Government of India Ministry of Finance run initiative.
Yes, sir.
So sectors are to follow that. It's
Absolutely.
not a particular road sector.
What I meant was that in terms of evolution, the road sector has been more forthcoming on this. And they have actually been at the forefront in resolving disputes in a way that the concessionaires benefit. And that's also something that we are seeing. I mean, the kind of, the scale with which the road sector has particularly grown is significant. And I hope that we can bring similar maturity in the metro sector as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I think very important, very subtle, the soft side, but I think very loud actions are required. And it's very clear. I don't have any time, but I need to call our last speaker, Ms. Sumika Nakane, who is the private sector specialist. Joint Secretary Sir spoke about the second part, which is the risk allocation, risk sharing mechanism. And ADB has got a lot of experience in that, and I would request upon our next speaker, Ms. Nakane, to speak about that.
Yeah, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to be here today, joining other esteemed speakers. So I got that challenge. I need to, I guess I need to finish within 1 minute, 2 minutes. And so I try my best. So I think I was supposed to talk about the risk sharing mechanism from the like a bankability point of view, but this has been already like a very well articulated by other speakers. So I'd like to add one example of the PPP project we financed in other like country in Asia, which is a Bangkok Metro project in Thailand, mentioned by DG Wasaki in the opening remarks. So ADB provided a 300 million private sector loan to Bangkok Metro, pink line and yellow line in 2019. And this was like developed based on PPP model and being implemented by the private sector developers. So I tried to share with you like how this project became bankable and also attractive to the private sector developers. So first of all, the government authority took like responsibility for the land and right-of-way arrangement, which was also mentioned as a critical component during the construction period by other speakers. So government took that responsibility, so private sector didn't need to take risks for the land arrangement and a right-of-way arrangement during the construction. And secondly, concession period was long enough at 30 years. So that was long enough to the private sector developers to recover the investments they made. And then in terms of the revenue risk, so the project was based on net cost model, where the developer needed to take a ridership risk. But however, as DG Wasaki mentioned, there was a fixed subsidies provided by authority for the first 10 years of operation until the ridership stabilized. So that made the project financially viable. And in addition to those measures provided by the authorities, ADB as DFIs, also we supported the projects through the financing structuring. So we provided long-term loan of 20 years. In addition to that, the repayment profile of our loan was back-ended to ease the cash flow until the ridership stabilizes. So that helped the private sector developers for the construction and operation of the project, which they have a strength with. So I think this is a good example of the risk sharing among the authority and private sector developers and financiers. So I'd like to add this to contribute to the discussion to give you an example of what has been discussed about the risk sharing model. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nakane, for sharing the ADB perspective in a very short time. Thank you very much. And I would take the risk, to just hand over the mic to Mr. Purusharth to just say a few lines on the way forward. You have heard all our speakers, and it would be good to listen to you. What do you think about how we move forward in this?
Thank you very much. I think everyone has spoken about the nuances of the PPP, and especially I liked Neha's talking points, which was coming directly from Dil Se. Huh? So, but it's not like that. I must say, yes, PPP is an evolving field, and we need to understand that it's a partnership. One thing is very clear, and that we have found many times missing, that when you are coming up for a PPP, you must think other side as a partner, not as a client and, or the master and vendor kind of relationship. That is a recipe for disaster. But as it's an evolving field, probably all these experiences which we sometimes gain while doing the projects will it's going to make into the coming, models of PPP. I can give you one example. In 2010, 8 and 10, a lot of projects has happened in road sector where both sides were bullish, the government as well as the private sector. Private sector has overcommitted, and many of those projects later on failed. And that has forced the government to evolve a new model coming from DBFOT mode to HAM mode. It happens when the concession agreements are not properly designed, things are not properly structured, and that's why we come up with concept of termination payments, another kind of de-risking where if the projected tariff is not being achieved within a certain limit, the concession period could be reduced or enhanced. So it's always a lock and key kind of arrangement. There is nothing, no PPP structure is casted in stone which we can say that, look, this is the best PPP structure for all the time to follow. It depends on evolving nature of the project, it depends on evolving nature of the financial landscape, it depends on evolving nature of the project structuring landscape. And every government is, whether it's a state government or the central government, is looking at these aspects. Central government's PPP understanding and preparation are obviously far superior, and we are trying to bring it down to state authorities also to understand couple of things, which probably all of us has indicated in one way or other. That's a partnership. You have to think other as a partner. Second is the risk sharing. When you make a project, please allocate risk appropriately, and that should be reflected in the concession agreement. And that is not only to the government. I would also say to the private sector that you cannot crib later on that this is there, this is not there. After all, when you signed on the dotted line, have you read before signing it? When you go for the bidding, have you read? Because this thing is coming before the signing. When you are appearing for bidding, you know the RFP, you know the RFQ, you know the concession agreement, every term and condition is there. And in the pre-bid consultation process, are you coming prepared? Are you giving good suggestions that what need to be changed, what not need to be changed? So it's a partnership from both sides. It's not a partnership only from government side. But unless both come together, and I'll always remember two lines from a very famous film, Border. Have you seen how many of you have seen The Border? Some of you, yes. So there's a couplet said in that film, "Hum hi hum hai to kya hum hai, tum hi tum ho to kya tum." It's coming together of the private sector and the public sector which makes a successful PPP. And it's need a lot of work to be done. We are on the right track. And probably in coming year, we'll see many more successful projects across sectors, including transport, including metro, including social sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I will again take the risk, but I would not leave without having the partnership with the audience here. Look forward to questions which audience may have. Anyone, please raise your hands if you have any questions.
Hi, I'm Arish from the Urban Catalysts. My question is about the human cost of PPP. Though we have had a detailed discussion, that has not been discussed. PPP in the public transport bus sector, for example, has been implemented through the gross cost contract model. Between 2019 and 2025, contractual drivers under BEST have gone on strike at least 11 times. So our organization also works towards having more women in the transport sector. So does the PPP model have anything in store for women or greater participation of women in the transport sector?
Thank you for the question. Can we have one more question before I ask look forward to the answers? Yes, please, Mr.
Topic of PPP, do we intend to have some lessons learned on mega projects which has been handled on PPP on the side of Ministry of Finance?
From the side of?
On the website of Ministry of Finance, do we intend to have some lessons learned from mega projects which we have taken on PPP?
Okay. And any more question? Maybe we can take one more.
PPP is considered, as far as CSR is considered, whether PPP CSR fund can be used in PPP, and if it is done, then what government policies are there on CSR fund utilization in PPP?
Thank you. So, coming to the first question, the human part in PPP, may I request Madam Namita to speak on that, please?
In our specific case, the comprehensive O&M that we have, while we were doing the document, we had this we had this thought in our mind right from the beginning that we would like women to be our train operators and also to man the stations. But we realized that we could not mandate it in the document that you have to bring in, because somewhere then that could legally be challenged. So in our contract agreement, we wrote that the concessionaire is encouraged. So that was our, thinking that we brought into that. And in our discussions with the concessionaire, we impressed upon him that we would like them to bring in women. So, so about, I think, 38 to 40% of the station controllers and the train operators are women. And they are college students, they are students who just came out of college. They were trained. They are the ladies who stay along the corridor. So it's along the Delhi-Meerut corridor. These are the girls who stay in those areas. So it's not only a question of their bringing employment over there, but also, a story in women empowerment, because they are now practical examples of the women who have come out in that area, and they are driving those trains, the fastest trains in the country. So it's a very strong message that has gone down in that area, and more women are willing to come in and work. So it's not something that you can mandate as such, but there are ways of doing it, and it can be done.
Wow, very good. So we hear MD Chennai Metro saying that.
Have you mandated in the concession agreement? Huh? Which project?
Our O&M project with DMRC.
Which project?
O&M project. Same, identical to
O&M project of what?
DMRC, maintenance of phase 2.
So, in that you have mandated that 50% would be?
We have 33% mandated reservation policy.
Mandated reservation
Which
policy.
includes
Precisely. So that ultimately, so that is what Namtaji is saying, and probably that is the answer. See, we must understand one thing. PPP is not the Ramban for every ill of the country. Gender justice, other kind of social justice, etc., they are prerogative of the government, and that has to come through government policy and program. And like any other project, the policy and program has to be followed by everyone. But if you put so many conditionality on the PPP concessionaire, what actually you are doing? You are limiting the playing field for that person. And you are actually stopping bringing in the private efficiency. And one of the, as we discussed, one of the reason why we should bring PPP, because it is also bringing the private efficiency. Don't limit that private efficiency part. Allow them to feel free, and please understand the basic premise that the private concessionaire is also a citizen of this country. He is as concerned about these issues as you are. Never think that because you are in the government, you are very much concerned, and because he is not in the government, private sector is not concerned. So leave this to them.
I agree on that point, but in the long run, if we don't do this, there
No,
may be
no,
nationalization.
no need to be in agreement or not agreement. This is my suggestion.
just
If the project will come to me for appraisal, I will generally suggest that don't limit the efficiency of the private sector.
All that has been taken.
So we come to the last question, and I'll request Joint Secretary Sir regarding the CSR fund, whether it can be used.
CSR is very simple. See, as we said, whose responsibility is project finance in a PPP project? It is responsibility of the concessionaire. From where he brings money, that is none of the concern of government. I am only saying that, look, this is the project cost. If it's a VGF project, I get what VGF I have to give through market bidding. Rest the concessionaire has to bring. Whether he is bringing it from taking loan from a bank, whether he is bringing it by issuing bonds, whether he is bringing it for borrowing from outside the country, or whether he is bringing by channelizing some CSR fund, it's his concern. But he has to do, as a condition precedent, he has to do financial close within a given time. But generally, PPP is not taking CSR, because how much CSR one can get? In a project of 1,000 crore, 10,500 crore, how much CSR one project can get from a company? You can't, manage much amount of CSR for a PPP project.
Thank you very much. And before we do the photo shoot at the end, I'll just request our chairman to say just few lines as the final note to end this session, please.
Yeah, so I'm giving a very
We have already
difficult
started
task.
removing the partition, so we have to.
Yeah, it's a difficult task, and I would try not to summarize. But it was a very insightful session, I believe, and very candid views were expressed from different corners of this segment. And I just go back to what I said. Partnership should be built on trust, and also the purpose is to deliver public goods to general public. So I think we should not lose sight of this ultimate goal. Thank you.
We come to the end of the session, and thank you, audience, for listening to us very patiently. And yeah. So we'll have just one, photo shoot, and then we'll have the mementos distribution. We can just distribute. No need of announcing it. Okay.
Right. Japanese.